Missouri had often brewed with sickening tales of segregatory practices in its space. Such city, singled out historically with troubled threadbare Black Americans in their huge numbers, knocked about by habitual despair, oppression, and ruthless denial. Gary Creamer, executive director of the State Historical Society of Missouri, discussed his book, Race and Meaning: The African American Experience in Missouri. The book traces the Missouri history of African Americans, including their transition from slavery to freedom, a look at life in all Black rural communities, and the movement to Missouri's urban areas to seek new opportunities. In 1819, however, when Missouri was still a territory seeking to become part of the United States, free Black people and their white allies staged one of the first civil rights demonstrations on the North American continent. The protest centered on the Missouri Compromise, an agreement that allowed Missouri to join the Union as a slave state in 1820. The decision amplified the conflict surrounding slavery in the U.S., a conflict that ultimately led to the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, Missouri, like many states that allowed slavery, outlawed teaching Black individuals to read. The story of white people interfering with Black people's ability to live and learn freely seems deeply embedded in America's cultural landscape. We have white conservatives lambasting critical race theory and the 1619 Project as invalid and harmful in the modern era. White folks, the ones who advocate for modern memory laws, desperately want America to forget about slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, or any policy that shows how white people created the systemic racism Black people endure today. However, this is what brings us to the crux of this interesting video segment, which aims to explore the unforgettable deeds of the likes of this remarkable individual, John Barry Meachum, who still found ways around the law to educate fellow Blacks by every means despite the life-threatening penalties laid down against doing so. In this video segment, therefore, we are taking a dive at the very history behind a one-time steamboat on a Mississippi River called Floating Freedom School, and why every Black parent ought to teach this history to their children. Before we continue, don't forget to support our works by hitting that like button in front of you, share with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and subscribe to Stay Put for more. While you help in building the rising membership of this channel, your support means a great deal to us. Let us now proceed. John Barry Meachum was a preacher who founded the oldest Black church in Missouri, but he is best remembered as a pioneer in the education of Black people in Missouri, after starting a school from his church and then on a steamboat on the Mississippi River, when it became illegal for Blacks to receive education in the state. In 1847, Missouri banned education for Black people. John Barry Meachum went ahead and built a steamboat on the Mississippi River and equipped it with a library, desks, chairs, and opened a floating freedom school. Let's explore the life of John Barry Meachum for a minute. Born a slave in May 1789, Meachum's birthplace was Goochland County, Virginia. At the age of 10, Meachum's owner, Paul Meachum, moved him and some 40 slaves to North Carolina and then Kentucky. Meachum, who longed to be free, learned several trades including carpentry and worked in a salt mine to purchase his freedom. This he did by the young age of 21. But Meachum wasn't content with his own freedom alone. "Still, I was not satisfied," Meachum wrote in 1846, "for I had left my father in Old Virginia, and he was a slave. It seemed to me at times, though I was 700 miles from him, that I held conversation with him, for he was near my heart. However, this did not stop here, for industry will do a great deal. In a short time I went to Virginia and bought my father and paid 100 pounds for him, Virginia money. It was a joyful meeting when we met together, for we had been apart a long time," Meachum said here. He had continued to work in the salt mine until he acquired enough money to buy the freedom of his father, who was a slave on a plantation back in Virginia. They worked and accumulated money, then walked back to Kentucky where they purchased the freedom of his mother and his siblings. Meachum had at the time married a woman named Lydia, and they had 2 children. But Lydia and the children were sold away to a man in St. Louis. Thus Meachum left for the Missouri Territory, and there he got work as a barrel maker. After some months, he was able to raise money for the freedom of his wife and children. By and by, He became well known in St. Louis, particularly among the black community, as many began to admire his craftsmanship and sought his services. Meachum had bought a house and was able to save enough money such that he started attending slave sales held at the old courthouse in St. Louis. His mission was to help free enslaved people by buying their freedom. Meachum often went to the sales to bid and would win. He would then ask the enslaved people whose freedom he had bought to join in, working with him in his barrel-making business to pay off what he had paid for their freedom so he could go back to the slave sales and buy others. Scores of people got their freedom that way. Along the way, Meachum had become a businessman, educator, preacher, and founder of the oldest black church west of the Mississippi River. He had begun preaching in 1821, was ordained in 1825, and established the first African Baptist church in St. Louis in 1827. But not before he met with Reverends John Mason Peck and James Welch, the two white Baptist missionaries who he befriended around this time. These reverends had taught Meachum how to read and write, convincing him that the way to lift his people out of oppression was to educate them. At the time, there was a city ordinance against the education of African Americans, denying them the skills of literacy, meant to keep enslaved individuals from questioning the legitimacy of white-dominated society. Ignoring this statute, Meachum worked to educate his fellow African Americans after he was ordained a minister in 1825 and became pastor of the First African Baptist Church, which still exists today, albeit in a different location. John Meachum had gone on to open a school in the basement of the church, where he began educating free and enslaved black St. Louisans. His church, through its popular emphasis on black education, became the Western headquarters for the Abolitionist Movement, and later the Freedmen Bureau. Eventually, he was arrested, and his church was shut down after local authorities found out about the school he was running in the basement for his congregation of over 200 members. An article by Notable Kentucky African Americans database says that Meachum's church was one of 5 in St. Louis that offered education under the guise of Sunday school. Each Sunday, over 100 free blacks and slaves attended classes in the dark basement of Meachum's church. White sympathizers helped teach the classes and provided supplies for the school, as Meachum did not charge tuition to those who could not afford it. Through the church, Meachum and Peck would offer secular education to the black St. Louisans who were willing to be educated. Up to 300 people received schooling through First African Baptist Church, which charged a monthly tuition fee of $1, but never turned anyone away for being unable to pay. White people in Missouri had supported schooling for black people as one of the ways to strengthen Christianity. But at some point, when racial tensions grew out of proportion, before the Civil War, a major population of the whites, Missourians, who had initially been supportive of schools for black people, shifted their perspective. They began to see educated blacks as a threat to slavery. While the new ordinance wasn't enforced en masse, police did force Meachum to close the school. And by the year 1847, Missouri had banned all education for black people in Louis. Meachum's school was shut down, but John B. Meachum did not give up. With the creativity and industry that had characterized his life up to this point, he had soon found a way to educate the people he loved so dearly. In response, Meachum took his school to the water, erecting a makeshift school on a steamboat that sailed the Mississippi River. With the strangest determination and the help of his friends, he had built this steamboat and had equipped it with a library, desks, and chairs. He opened what he called the Floating Freedom School on the Mississippi River, existing just outside the reach of the state's jurisdiction. On this boat, anchored in the middle of the Mississippi River where city ordinances didn't apply, Meachum invited local slaves and free African Americans to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and other subjects. The school provided an education for hundreds of free and enslaved black students in the St. Louis area. Students were ferried back and forth between St. Louis and the Freedom School in small skiffs. The school eventually attracted teachers from the East. Hundreds of black children were educated at the Freedom School in the 1840s and 1850s. Those who could pay were charged $1 a month. One of the early students was James Milton Turner, who would go on to establish 30 new schools for African Americans in Missouri after the Civil War. Another was John R. Anderson, who received much of his reading and religious training from the school. Reverend Anderson later took over management of the school after Meachum's death in 1854. School attendance dropped off just before the Civil War, with only 155 black children enrolled in 1860. Going forward, Meachum had continued his carpentry work, eventually purchasing freedom for a great many slaves. Meachum and his wife also served as conductors on the Underground Railroad, using their home and church to facilitate the endeavors, training newly freed black people in carpentry and other trades, helping runaways to freedom in Illinois, often transporting them by boat across the Mississippi River to a free state. They also purchased enslaved people, providing them with vocational training and practical life skills, and then emancipating them. Between 1826 and 1836, Meachum and his wife had assisted a remarkable number of slaves in this way. Almost every freed person repaid Meachum, allowing him to free others. Meachum eventually published his views on education and race in an address to all of the colored citizens of the United States, a printed pamphlet that ran in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1846. Meachum would educate hundreds, free and enslaved, over the course of his life. One of his students, James Milton Turner, would go on to become the founder of Lincoln Institute, now Lincoln University, the first higher education institution for black people in Missouri. This freedom school survived until Meachum's death on February 19, 1854. Meachum had passed away at his pulpit during a Sunday morning service. He was buried in the Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis. Today, the work of Meachum and his wife as Underground Railroad conductors can be found at the Mary Meachum Crossing in St. Louis, and the First African Baptist Church, now the First Baptist Church, is still up and running. After Meachum's death, his widow, Mary, continued his legacy, especially his legacy of finding freedom for slaves. Mary continued her work with the Underground Railroad. In 1855, she was arrested while helping 5 runaway slaves cross the Mississippi River and jailed for violating the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, but was acquitted. It can only be said that the couple spent their lives promoting freedom, education, and self-respect to the black community. They are well remembered in Missouri for their contributions. The Meachum School of Haymont is a theological school named for them. The John Barry Meachum Scholarship, established at St. Louis University, recognizes Meachum's work as a minister. And the Mary Meachum Freedom Crossing is part of the National Park Service's National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. In closing, to beat every system of terror and oppression, we must have an entrepreneurial spirit. A spirit that keeps climbing and spreading into possibilities by every means. John Barry Meachum showed the determination and innovation needed from all educators. We mustn't be dissuaded from our focus. We cannot let our circumstances stand in our way. We all face challenges every day. We have to be willing to think creatively and take risks to create a better future. What could have the life of the likes of James Milton Turner been today without the contributions of fearless people like John Barry Meachum, who was committed to their educational advancement? How many more black lives out there in Missouri could have been lost forever in the deep consuming darkness of segregational cruelty and suffering had the likes of Meachum not turned up? Because of him, many black generations conquered, many more survived. That brings us to the end of this mind-moving video. Did you happen to learn a thing or two from this? Do not hesitate, share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. We are always delighted to hear from you. Support our works also by hitting that like button in front of you. Share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to Stay Put for more interesting videos coming up while you help in building the rising membership of this channel. Your every support is immensely valued. Thank you for watching.